So Exodus 6:8-9, it says, "And I will bring you into the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord." So Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel. But they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. So I'm talking about the children of Israel when they were in Egypt and they were servants in Egypt, and Moses got the word from the Lord that he was going to take them out of Egypt and take them into the promised land. This is basically when God is telling them, hey, God is telling Moses, this is what you are going to tell them to do. So Moses tries to tell them, but it says they didn't heed his voice because of the anguish. So here God called Moses to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt and out from being slaves under Pharaoh. So here we have God, and he has this amazing plan that says, I don't want you guys to be slaves anymore. I don't want you guys to be slaves under Pharaoh. I want to deliver you, and I want to give you guys freedom. After being a slave for so many years, how many of you guys would be like, wow, I finally get to be free? It would be a very exciting thing, right? If you've been slaving and having to listen under someone, and then someone walks in, they're like, but you know what? I want to give you freedom. You would think right away, you would be like, yes, give me freedom. But that's not what happened here in this story. What happened is Moses is like, hey, I'm going to deliver you into the promised land. You don't have to be a slave anymore. And they didn't even listen to what Moses was saying. So here Moses again tells them the plan of how God's going to deliver them, and they didn't pay any attention to what Moses was telling them. But the reason they were not able to hear his voice was because of, and it says in the scripture, because of the anguish of spirit and the cruel bondage. Many times when we're going through situations in life and we're going through maybe a difficult situation or a hard situation or something that we just have to go through in life, and we're praying that we can get out of this situation, and we think that, okay, I'm going through the situation, I'm praying to get out. We think that when we get out, it's like we can just leave the situation back where it was, leave the situation here, move on in life, and just not even have any part of that situation left over in us. But a lot of times what happens is when we're going through this situation, we get through the situation, it's almost like bits and pieces of that situation are still stuck with us. So as we try to move forward in life, we kind of still have that situation again carried on with us. So many times we're going through the situation thinking that once we get through, it's not going to have that big of an impact on us. We think we can get through the situation, and again, when we get to the other side of the situation, it's like we have like this smooth transition. We're never ever going to have to look back. It's like you wake up and it's a whole new day. Nothing could ever impact me again from the situation. It's gone in the past and I'll never have to talk about it again. So my question is, are there any girls out there who remember something that their old boyfriend has done to them? If you're a girl and you remember what your old boyfriend did to you, raise your hand. Now, how many of you are currently with your boyfriend, you can remember something that they did? I didn't say it's bad. Now, but I want to say, so now, how many married people in here can remember something that their husband did? Now, how many guys out there have ever been in a relationship and the girl's like, well, do you remember when you did this? And you're thinking that was like 10 years ago. But yet the girls somehow still remember what happened? Right. It's like, I swear I can remember every little detail of I have like this box of everything Mike has given me. And it can be a flower petal, and I know exactly what anniversary, what date. I know like that flower petal, it's so distinguished from any other flower petal. Like I can remember, it's like lock and key in my brain. So talking about going through situations and trying to leave that situation, not having that situation a part of you anymore, is what happens is many, many times we go through these past experiences and we may leave the situation behind us, and when we move forward and we have a mindset of what had happened from that past experience. Has anyone ever had that happen? So maybe a good example could be maybe you were in a relationship and your significant other cheated on you, and it was just like the worst thing that you've ever been through. You break up, and then you finally find peace again. You're like, oh, I finally found someone else and I want to date them. And you start dating them and all of a sudden it's kind of like you're walking on eggshells. It's like, ooh, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. And it's not even the same person again. This is someone different. So you're in this new relationship and you all of a sudden are guarding your heart. Now you're guarding your heart because you're basing that on your past relationship. Or maybe you had an experience where you confided in someone. Desiree, I told you my deepest, darkest secret. And then all of a sudden I find out that she told someone. And all of a sudden it circles back to me that my deepest, darkest secret is no longer my deepest, darkest secret. Everyone at 412 knows. How many of you know the next time that I need to share something with someone, I don't know if I'm going to share that because I had this experience with someone who, this is a fake situation, by the way. She's amazing at keeping secrets. So you have this situation that you went through, and now because of that situation, you're walking in a new situation with someone else, but you still have that mindset that's almost dictating the way you think, that's almost dictating the things that you do, the way that you feel, all based on a past experience that has happened in your life. So we have these old mindsets again that we have that may be keeping us from a certain place in our life, or maybe keeping us from a relationship, or maybe keeping us from a certain situation. And this is kind of like the children of Israel here. Because of their past bondage and anguish of spirit, they couldn't listen to what Moses was saying, because being in bondage for that long, maybe they would never have been able to imagine a life with freedom. Maybe being a slave for so long, and someone is telling you day in and day out the exact things that you have to do. To imagine a life without anyone telling you what to do, that might be like, wow, I don't really want to do that because I'm so used to someone telling me what to do that I don't really want to do that on my own anymore. And it reminds me of, I remember when I got my license, and how when you just drive with your parents, you know how to get places, right? But then all of a sudden when you're in the car, and I just remember like for the first time I ever drove by myself, my car, like my first car, they bought me a totaled car and like my cousin fixed it up. So it wasn't quite ready on my 16th birthday. So my amazing brother Billy was like, you can drive my car the day so you can, spend your 16th birthday on your own. So I met him at the church, and I literally like pulled left out of the church and came to the light right after the church. And I was like, what way am I going? Like, because I'd never done it myself. I like didn't even know what way to go. So how many of you know it was like, wow, this is actually kind of easier when someone else is driving? Based on your past experiences, again, like the children of Israel who were in bondage for so long and who had been slaves for so long, for them to imagine a life of freedom could have been a crazy thought, even though when I asked you at first, how many of you, if you were slaves and someone offered you freedom, you would go right away. You would think that you would go right away. But again, the past things that have happened to us really do have an effect on what we do and the way we think in the future. So old mindsets have the ability to hinder us potentially from moving forward. So in our relationship with God, in our walk with Him, and all the plans and the purposes that He has for our lives, we have to realize that we may have old mindsets from past experiences that we have that, wow, someone broke my trust, therefore I'm not going to trust God. Wow, someone let me down, therefore I feel like God is going to let me down. So a lot of times, again, based on the things that happened in our past, we form these mindsets that are literally hindering us from walking in everything that God has for us. So in Exodus 13:17-18, it says, then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. This is so crazy to me. And you know how it's like you can read the Bible over and over again, but sometimes you read a verse and it's like you read it and the light goes off? So the children of Israel were not far from the land that God wanted them to go to. But because of their mindsets, he knew that if they see war, they may return back to Egypt. So I'm going to take them the long way around so I can give them time to change their mindsets. That's how important we have to realize that mindsets can be in our lives. So again, because of this old mindset, God decided to lead them the long way around to make sure they didn't give up and go back to Egypt. So huge impacts is what can happen when we have mindsets. Those mindsets can have really big impacts on our lives. So many times, again, we can think we're gonna say, you know what, I'm leaving this situation, I'm not gonna have a mindset, poof, my mindset's gone. Has that ever happened to anyone? That's amazing, because it's never happened to me. Usually what happens to me is when I have to change my mindset, it's kind of like, well, I'm kind of comfortable where I am. If God wants to challenge me on something, I'm like, well, that's cool, but let me think about it for a while. And then I think about it for a while, and then it's like, I don't know, I'm kind of comfortable where I'm at, and I kind of like the way it's going. God's like, well, you got to look at this, and you got to look at this. Examine your heart. Examine my heart. What? Many times, it's not easy to change mindsets. If it were that easy to change mindsets, God could have led the children of Israel on the straight path because they would have been able to change their mindset like that. But unfortunately, they weren't able to change their mindsets that fast. So God knew for the children of Israel, all right, I need to change their mindsets. What's going to happen is there has to be a process. Sometimes I don't like process. I don't like to go through the process. Sometimes I don't like to watch other people go through the process because that's sometimes hard for me to watch. Has anyone ever had to go through a process? To me, school was always like a process. It's like if you could just test out of all these classes and then just get your degree, but how many of you know that's not really practical? It's not really reality. You have to go through all your basic education, and then you kind of have to work your way. It's like the 100 level classes to the 200 to the 300 to the 400. Oh my gosh, I was like, can I just take the 400 classes and give me my degree? No. You have to go through, again, a process. And sometimes the process that we go through is not a fun process. Again, I always think of the genie in the lamp where you can just rub it and be like, I want 3 things. My first thing is that I'll never struggle with this ever again. Poof! And I never struggle with it again. If only it were that easy. So, in this next verse, it says, I love how randomly in my notes it'll be italicized. I don't even know, it's like somehow, some way when I transfer it from my computer to my phone, it like italicizes a verse. It's God, he really wants you guys to hear this one. So it says, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So it was that quails came up every evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. So once the children of Israel left Egypt, they may have started to think, how many of you know that? So maybe sometimes as slaves, you're just doing what you got to do and you're not really even thinking about what you want to do because they're just telling you what to do. So I'm here thinking, all right, the children of Israel have now left Egypt. They're on their path through the wilderness. Now they have a little bit of time to think for themselves. They don't have someone who's telling them every single move that they have to make every single day. So they started to think maybe, okay, freedom, maybe freedom's not such a bad idea because in the beginning they didn't really like the idea of freedom. But now they're walking in a little bit of freedom. They're thinking, man, I would probably like to be free. So as they're taking this long road around, their mindsets could be changed. Now they have to think for themselves. So here you have the children of Israel and they start thinking, what's this newfound freedom going to be like? And maybe they imagine what their freedom would be like. Do any of you ever try to imagine sometimes, what if I ask God for peace? And in your mind, when I ask God for peace, you think of exactly what it's going to be like. Has that ever happened to anyone? So God, I'm going through this situation here, all right? And it's almost like there's this huge mountain in front of me. So God, I need you to move this mountain. So in my mind, or most of our minds, when we imagine this mountain, we're asking God to move it, we typically think there's a mountain in front of us and God's just gonna kind of like sweep it aside and we're gonna be able to walk through, right? Kind of like the children of Israel in the Red Sea. There's a sea, he parted it, they walked through, right? So a lot of times when asking God for something, it's like, God, I have this mountain and I need you to just move it. And he's like, oh, I'll help you with that. Here's a shovel. Here's a bulldozer. So what if I came up to Mount Everest and I'm like, God, there's this mountain in front of me. What am I going to do? And he's like, I'll give you this little shovel. I just need you to just keep plucking away until you move that mountain. That's kind of not the idea that I had in my mind when I asked you to move this mountain. So a lot of times when asking God for things, we think of what it's going to be like. God, I need to experience more love. And we have this expectation of what this love is going to be like. Or God, I need, again, peace. And we think that it's going to be a certain way. Or God, I need you to change this situation. And then the situation starts changing. And it's like, oh, wait, I didn't really mean for you to change the situation like that. So again, just like we have these mindsets that we base on our past experiences, a lot of times we have expectations that we base off of our past experience. So here the children of Israel are deciding what this new journey should be like, and they're not sure if they like it. So God says, I'm going to give them bread, and they wake up in the morning and they find manna. So here in the verse, it's just like the children of Israel are complaining. They're complaining. If you read the chapter, it's all about how they're complaining. So God's like, you know what? I'm just going to give you quail and I'm going to give you bread. They wake up in the morning and they find manna and they're like, what is this stuff on the ground, right? So when they had asked God for food, they're probably thinking, well, this is what my food's going to be like. And they wake up and they have no clue what was sitting on the ground and what they were going to do with it, right? So a lot of times when we ask God for one thing, we expect him to give it to us, and all of a sudden he gives us something else. And we think, what's that? Manna. What's that? That's not what I asked for. God, when I asked you to move this mountain, I didn't mean for you to give me a little shovel and let me pluck away at it, and it's going to take 50 years to do it. I wanted you to just swoop it to the side, right? You following me? So here the children of Israel, because of their mindsets, he takes them the long way. Now they start thinking from themselves. God's trying to work on their mindsets, but now all of a sudden the experiences that they're going through, they're expecting something that is just from their own thoughts and their own desires, and they're expecting it to go away that they think that it should go. So maybe they thought, now I was a slave and now I'm free. So because I'm free, I should maybe have better food, or because I'm free, I should have this, or because I'm free, I should have this, or, well, God, I was a sinner and now I'm a Christian, so now because I'm a Christian, you should give me this. God, because I tithed to you, why didn't I get any money back this week? God, because I tithed to you, how did you let me drive down the road and run out of gas? And you may be thinking, I never did that. But a lot of times, be honest with yourself, we have these expectations that we put on God of what our life should be like. We have an expectation of what the call that he has for us should be like. We have the idea of who the perfect so-and-so in our life should be, right? So we come up with these expectations of what we want life to be like, and we say, God, this is what I want. Give it to me exactly how I want it. So God, I ask for forgiveness, maybe in a situation that I had went through and I was talking to you and I asked for forgiveness. Why is it that I feel this way or this way or this way? Again, we have expectations on what we think it should be like. We have current expectations and future expectations based on our past experiences, and we think it should just be the way that we want it. So again, these expectations work a lot like our mindsets that we were talking about earlier. Something that you go through in the past may give you a reason to expect something in the future. This is kind of a silly story, but I remember I was 17 and I started dating my husband for the first time, and it was actually my first boyfriend, my first real serious, I introduced him to my parents kind of thing, So I was 17 years old, and I always thought boys were like hot, but I was always in dance so much, I never really like thought about it too much, you know what I'm saying? So this is a really silly story. So I remember, this is talking about expectations. Okay, don't forget this. So I remember the first time we have like a community center called the WCA, and back in the day, like a lot of the guys I knew used to play basketball there, right? So he's like, well, I'm gonna go up to the WCA and play basketball. If you wanna come watch, you can. So me and one of my cousins she came with me, and we are sitting on the bleachers, and all the guys are playing basketball. It's getting all hot up in there. I don't even care, right? Like, I'm not even paying attention, right? And I just remember Mike took his shirt off. Again, I'm 17, I just started dating him. I didn't even think anything of it, and my cousin was like, oh my gosh, he's ripped. And I was like, what? Like, I just didn't even like think about that stuff, right? So I was like, oh yeah, I guess. She's like, I mean, obviously you noticed, right? And I was like, well, I guess now that you say it, yeah. Okay, so this is my point about expectations. So how many of you know that I didn't really care much about it, but then you see that and it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. So then, based off past experiences, you notice it in other people now, right? So maybe you notice, like, you're like, oh, this girl has really pretty eyes. And then it's like, oh, her eyes are so pretty. And then the next time you see a girl, it's like, oh, well, her eyes are, yeah. And then you like start like thinking about things based on something you experienced in the past. Again, I told you my illustration was going to be very silly, but it's funny. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying all I know is because my cousin pointed something out, now which is something I noticed, because she changed my whole mindset when I was 17 years old. So a lot of times in our past, things happen that can adjust the way that we react in the future. Same as our mindsets, same with expectations. So it could be you went through a situation in the past and God said, you said, God, I need help through this situation. And he got you out of that situation so fast. So 10 years down the road, you're going through a situation and it's like, God, I need out. And he's like, actually, I'm going to take you through this one. But when it happened that he took you out right away in the past, in the future, you think, he's just going to take me out of this. Great, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden, he starts taking you through the situation. And then you're wondering, well, that's kind of a little bit different than I thought you were going to do, because back in the day, you took me right out of the situation, and now you're taking me through the situation. So again, a lot of the things that happened in the past affect how we act in the future. In Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not evil, to give you a future and a hope. So there are expectations based on what you have been through. Then there are our own ambitions and our own desires. Point is that sometimes the expectations that we put on life, the mindsets that we have on life, our ambitions that we personally have, can sometimes get in the way of our walk with God. Think of the children of Israel. God was like, I want to take you there, but you have a little mindset. I'm just going to take you around. 40 years later, they're walking through the wilderness, right? Many, many times, our mindsets, our past experiences can literally hinder us from where the Lord has for us, because we're not willing to deal with our mind. We're not willing to deal with our heart. We're not willing to leave the past in the past and say, God, it's not about what I want anymore, but it's about what you want. So I'm not saying that he doesn't give us dreams and aspirations and all those things, but I'm saying that sometimes we get so caught up on the things we want. We get so caught up on the way we think things should be that we forget that he has a plan for us. And I love this. It says, I give you thoughts of peace to give you a future. We need to set our eyes on his desires, because it says here, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord. He knows who we are. He created us. No one knows us better than God knows us. And we may think, well, I know myself better than God does. No, God knows us because he created us. And he says, I have a plan for you. But we have to be willing to step back and say, God, I'm going to trust in your plan. I'm not going to keep fighting it, but I'm going to lay down my mindsets. God, I'm going to lay down my expectations based on the past experiences. But God, I want your expectations. And that's what I have over this scripture is his expectations, because we need to set our eyes on his expectations, his desires, his purposes, and his plans. So you might think, well, how do I do this? This is where the process comes into place. And in Romans 12:2, it says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Does anyone out there have a huge imagination? I know some people in here, their kids have huge imaginations. I feel like I'm in the same boat as her. So Dan, his lovely little girl, she's just the cutest thing, and she has like this huge imagination. So I met Jessica at Target, and we're standing there. She said, Miss Ashley, do you see the kangaroo? And I'm like, I do. Where is it at? She's like, right there. Oh, it's hopping away. And I'm like, it is hopping away, right? How many of you know that kids have huge imaginations? I just never grew out of mine. I remember one time, I asked Mike one time, what are you thinking about? And he's like, nothing. I'm like, come on, just tell me, what are you thinking about? He's like, I'm literally not thinking about anything. And I'm like, how do you not, I think that would give me a break once in a while, because I feel like my mind is constant. I don't even know how I fall asleep at night, because my mind is just constantly thinking and thinking and thinking. So again, I don't even know how people could not even do that, but so I was always thinking, what if I won the lottery? Now, I've never even purchased a lottery ticket in my life, but it's just fun to think about, right? So had I purchased a lottery ticket and won, and say I won $1 million, I always think what would I do with $1 million? And I think of all the things that I would do if I won $1 million. Has anyone else ever done that? 4 of you. $1 billion. Has anyone ever thought about what they would do with $1 billion? Maybe more of you have really high expectations on the lottery. So I would always think, what would I do if I had $1 million? So how many of you know that a lot of people who win the lottery spend their money like that? You hear stories and stories about the people win all this money, and that it's like, oh, I have so much money, I don't even know what to do with it, so I just spend it all, right? So it's funny, because I was thinking about someone who may have been raised with a lot of money. They get raised with the money. Their parents kind of teach them about money. They learn to maybe invest their money, spend wisely on the money, and earn more money. And then you can invest this, and then your money doubles or triples or however much, right? So the person who kind of grew up in money, they know a little bit more about money, so they understand the process of investing and all this different stuff about money, and again, being careful with your money and all this kind of stuff, and they typically can either stay steady or increase money. And then you have the person who wins the lottery, and usually the stories that you hear is when they win the lottery, they don't even know what to do because they've never had this much money before, so they think of all the amazing things they can buy, like a boat that can never be sailed because you don't even live by a lake, or you know what I'm saying? You just buy all this crazy stuff because you came into all this money. So this is where the process comes in, if you will. Because if you were raised with money, your parents typically teach you about money, and then you have this process, and because of the process, you can, again, learn to invest and learn to increase your money and learn to work and get more money. But if you don't have the process, a lot of times, if it just gets dumped on you, how many of you know that you kind of are being set up for failure? It's kind of like we talked about the other week. If you put a 2-year-old on a mountain bike down a dirt road and with no training wheels and no help, you're probably setting the child up for failure, right? So, again, if you're not prepared for what's to come, you may not be sure how to handle your situations. So what do old mindsets matter? What do old expectations have anything to do with our relationship with God? Well, sometimes we ourselves are the ones to get in the way of our relationship with God. Sometimes we, our old mindsets and our old expectations, hinder ourselves from going further in our walk with him. So again, I was using the example, maybe again, someone broke your trust, so then you have a hard time trusting God. Someone let you down, so now you think that God is going to let you down. All these different kind of examples, and because of these old mindsets and expectations, we limit ourselves and we won't ever get to the place that God has for us because we can't let go of certain things from the past, maybe distrust or brokenness, maybe an old letdown. But God doesn't want us to be like the children of Israel who literally just wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years. He wants us to confront these mindsets now. He wants us to look at our past expectations now. So it's not something that we have to walk around in the wilderness for 40 years doing. But he wants us to move forward in him now. He wants us to get to the place where he has for us now. So again, he doesn't have to spoon feed us as baby. We don't have to remain as slaves in the wilderness, but we can grow up and become everything that God really does have for us. But there is a process. And I love this verse because it says we need to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We need to allow ourselves to fall into the process that God has for us so that we may know what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. But how do we allow this process to start working in us? Well, how do I not wander around in the wilderness like the children of Israel for 40 years? Because a lot of times you say, well, the process, all right, well, what is the process, right? Can I have the musicians come forward? In Hebrews 3:7-9, it says, therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works for 40 years. How do we start this process? How do we get through this process? We have to hear his voice. They tested him and tried him and saw his works for 40 years, yet they wouldn't hear his voice, yet they wouldn't change their mindsets, yet they wouldn't let go of their past expectations and say, God, change my mind, let me just put my expectations on whatever it is that you have. They wouldn't let that process happen. And this process, again, is something that comes from the inside out. Like we were talking about earlier, this isn't something that just happens at the snap of a finger, but this is something that we need to look back and really examine our lives and think, is there anything holding me back? Is there any mindset that I have in my mind that's holding me back from everything that God has for me? Is there any past experience that I've had that's now hindering me from trusting God, from putting my whole heart into everything that God has? Is there anything that happened in the past that's literally holding me back from walking in his calls and walking in his plans and in his purposes? It could be bitterness. It could be hurt. It could be brokenness. It could be someone let you down. Whatever it is that causes us to be at a standstill. We can't move forward in him because of these old mindsets. And again, it's like we're walking in the wilderness not knowing where we're going. But we have to renew our mind. And when we renew our mind, we can see like he sees. And when we renew our mind and have the mind of Christ, that's when we can see what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. But in order to see the will and the purposes and plans that God has for us, we have to renew our mind. But to renew our mind, we can't let those past mindsets be stuck in there. We can't have the mind of Christ and keep our old mind at the same time. Maybe it might be hardness of heart, where we can't even comprehend what he's trying to show us. But I can't tell you what you have going on inside of your mind. I can't tell you what you have going on inside of your heart. It takes you looking at your mind and you looking at your heart to say, God, what is it inside of me that is holding me back from experiencing everything that you have for me? And maybe it's just a small part that's just holding you a little bit back. But why would you want to just experience a little bit of what God has for you when you can really experience the fullness that he has for you? ultimately we want to be in a place, again, where we can in turn put on his heart, his spirit, and have his desires in our lives, where we don't even have to have that battle going on inside of us. I want what I want, but I want what you want. I want to hear what you are saying, but I also want to hear what other people are saying too. And we have this like turmoil going on inside of us, but we need to come to that place where we can literally lay down all of our desires, all of our ambitions, all of our expectations, to have the ambitions of Christ, to have the expectations of Christ, to have that call of God work in our lives. Again, and we become just as he is, so we can in turn lead others to follow him. And I mentioned earlier, I just mentioned it for a second, but we need to be in this place where God's not literally just spoon feeding us. How many of you know that we need to grow up eventually? If you're still, however many years old, and I'll just throw out a number, 30 years old, and you're laying in bed and your alarm goes off and you're like, Mom, come get me out of bed. And your mom comes up and she's like, well, I can't really carry you because you're 30 years old now, but I'll hold your hand and walk downstairs with you. And then you sit at the table and I want oatmeal. So your mom comes up and she's like, trying to give you, if you saw that happen to someone, would you be like, what is going on? But that's what God's doing with some people. And he says, I don't want to have to I don't want to have to spoon feed you anymore. He's like, I want to see you grow up and become everything that I have for you. I don't want you to remain as a slave and walk around in the wilderness because you won't change your mind. He says, I want you to examine your mind. I want you to examine your heart, look inside and see what it is that you have going on. Be honest with yourself, and then I can take you to that place that I have for you. Every single one of us have a different past. Every single one of us have different past experiences. We're not all going to have the same thing going on. But it's each individual person who has to look inside their heart, again, be honest with themselves and say, God, help me come to this place in my life where I can really examine my heart and examine my mind and become everything that you have. So if you guys could just stand with me tonight.